I'll make it right again, but it's no use, you said. And my hunger grows and grows. I have to write the meaning of my life, or else everything's in vain. When the glory tries to tempt you, it may seem like what you need. But if glory makes you happy, why are you so broken up? So tell me how it felt when you walked on water. Did you get your wish? Floating to the surface quicker than you sank. I know. So tell me how it felt when you walked on water. Did you get your wish? Floating to the surface quicker than you sank. I know. Don't say you lose just yet. Get up and move ahead, and not only for yourself, 'cause that's your role, the work that stirs your soul. You can make for someone else.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gundam gaming and amateur psychology.
Yep,
We'll get into it
one of those, yeah.
as the topic goes on. I am, of course, Steven, aka Midnight Hatter, your host, and joining me as always is the Blue Gamer, the Gundam explainer, Adam Blue. How are you, my friend?
Hey, doing good. Always glad to do this. Curious what we're getting into. When you told me the topic, I was like, that's pretty interesting. But also, I'm curious about the other thing that happened over the weekend. So I'm
Hey.
enjoying this as much as the viewers right now.
Awesome. Well, that's a lovely segue, honestly. Before we get into today's topics in chief, I do want to give a shout out to the chat. I see Robert and Goose, Ultronymous. Good to see you all. Looks like who else we got in here? No one's here. And Legion. Nice to see you there, buddy.
And Robert's
Um,
wearing a Midnight Hatter hat. That's awesome.
yeah, happy birthday, Robert.
Oh,
Got a Midnight Hatter hat for him.
is that today's his birthday today, or is it around this time
It
period?
was a few days ago.
Oh, happy late birthday,
Yeah. And,
Robert.
what's going on, Chris and Shirt Lad? Good to
Oh,
see you guys.
yes.
But yeah, and today has just been an awesome day in general because, you dropped that video about Prime Day deals
Oh, yeah.
for Gundam, and now I just got in a lovely little shipment of P Bandai goodies.
Ooh,
So
that's a good one.
we've got the Varg wheel, one of the many Zazabi prototypes that Moon Gundam has introduced. I can't wait to build this thing because honestly, like the one thing about the Moon Gundam to me is I was like, I don't like the head, and the G doors are kind of cool. Like I like the G doors on the Psycho Bawu, for instance. But
No, I'd agree. Like the Moon Gundam design, speaking of Robert, he actually sent that over to me a while
oh,
back.
nice.
Yeah, like everything about the moon is awesome except the head. Like right here, it is kind of a little, but it's like okay because that's an awesome design. The Vargwell is a good example. Like that artist, which there's characters in my brain, but I don't know if I can pronounce them. It's like Inepe Gonko. I just made up a bunch of stuff. Please, please.
Yeah, that's kinda how I feel, and then, like, there's so many, Gundam creators that have, like, the first 3 letters of their name are Fuk, so it's like you have Fukui, you have Fukuda,
Mm.
and it's like, I don't know which ones I like and which ones I hate, but
Oh, Legion got it. I think yeah, see? But it's
oh,
something
yeah,
like that.
Ippei Gyobu,
Okay, yeah. And hey,
um
no disrespect, I wish I could pronounce everyone's name correct. I would be so happy, but this is life.
Well, it's one of those things that the only reason that I got decent, I'm not perfect at it, but I got decent at pronouncing, foreign names is because I'm a big soccer fan. So, the number of international
Oh, because you
players,
hear
it's
it.
like you kind of have to get
Yeah,
into the mold.
okay.
But, yeah, I'm glad that you brought up this weekend. This weekend was pretty eventful,
I
for
bet.
lots of reasons. For one, I entered my first model building competition, just a local one, we're not Gunpla Builders World Cup over here, but we did finish our RE100 Bawu, which features, you know, our magnetic hardpoints where we've got Glemmy standing on the back. We've got a magnetic hardpoint on the rear skirt for the beam rifle to anchor onto. The head and arms are both wired up for LEDs. I was able to figure out how to get the like metal plates onto the peg hand where the beam saber connects. So there's an LED in the beam saber handle, and it only lights up when the beam
When it
saber is connected to the hand, which is really awesome.
that is awesome. And
Oh,
so but also you have the base,
yeah,
your
I was gonna
custom
say,
base.
not to mention we've got, our custom Midnight Hatter exclusive, action base. But let me tell you,
Yeah.
I did not even place in the top 3. These guys are serious builders, and this is even for a local competition.
Yeah,
So, I have a
wow.
lot of work ahead of me if I'm going to, do anything come fall where they have a fall model contest. So,
Oh. Well,
now
would you
one of the things that
say
I learned
yeah.
is that, you can actually enter in multiple categories. So, they had a Gunpla category, but then they also had, like, a sci-fi category, a aircraft
Oh,
category, diorama. So and there was one guy that entered in 6 different categories, and he actually placed in 3 of them, I wanna say.
wow.
So he was a boss. uh, he won the Gunpla competition with
Oh,
a custom Zuda that had, Origin Zaku legs and had this sweet, like, silver, gold, and black paint job. I posted it over on the Discord in the Gunpla channel. Go check it out if you guys haven't. Like I said, serious talent on display, but let me tell you, I think that there is preferential treatment given to people that do paint jobs and weathering as opposed to the sort of gimmicks that I put into my kit.
okay, that's what I was gonna ask, like, what did you get from this by seeing the top placers, and it's mainly the
Yeah.
paint, you're
They
saying?
love
Detail?
details, they love
Okay.
paint, because there was a similar the only other, model that was there that had similar kinda gimmicks to what I had was and you're gonna love this, it was in the automotive section. Someone made a miniature scale model of, like, a KISS rock and roll van, and it was on a rotating, platform. It had lights, it had music playing from it, and, like, there were even, like so it had, like, airbrushed decals on the side of the van of, like, KISS, and then on inside the van, like, you had the doors open and stuff, there was, like, guitars, and there was, like, a little shag carpet inside the van, and, like,
Wow.
magazine covers and posters and stuff. It was phenomenal. It's actually on the Hobbytown, Virginia,
Website?
Instagram, yeah.
Ins
They
yeah,
they
I
they
mean,
posted it, but that
that's
one didn't even place. I think or well, no,
oh.
I think it got 3rd place in that
In
category.
okay, because like, that reminds me, like, it would be cool if you did something with the cockpit, that you were the Zeta cockpit, like, that would be the thing, that's a cool idea.
That's definitely what we're gonna have to do to step it up, so and I'd love to enter into multiple categories, so if I do, like, a Gundam piece and then maybe, like, something Metal Gear for the sci-fi category and then maybe a diorama, I don't know.
Oh,
Drop
that's
drop
cool.
your, suggestions in the chat/comments of this video, and, let me know what you guys think I should try and have ready to go by fall.
Yeah, that is neat. That really makes me think too about, like, seeing if any places do that around here. I've so far what I've seen, they don't, but when I would it would be like, what's something neat? Like, I created that custom Richter Belmont. Like, all
Yeah.
I need to do now is get a base, I have some skeletons, and, like, just make a diorama, make it a piece. I just need to
And
do
it's
that.
worth noting that in the miniatures category, there was a custom painted, Kamen Rider, and there was also a custom painted Goku figure. So there
Oh,
were, like, just anime figures that had been customized. So, like, a Richter Belmont would have fit perfectly in that category.
that is really neat.
And
I'll
it's
have
interesting, I think that, um, because I was just looking at, the Gunpla Builders World Cup, and apparently, you can enter virtually. You don't have to be on site to enter the Gunpla Builders World Cup, for your region.
Oh, okay.
And part of me thinks that that's cool because it obviously removes a certain barrier. You don't have to travel to go to this event, but, you know, we've talked about this before where it's like sometimes the best builders are not the best photographers.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think it does open up maybe a potential business opportunity for those of you who are talented toy photographers, people like my buddy Drackmore Digital. I know we've got Ian. I don't know if he's in chat today. Uh, but yeah, there are those of you among us in the chat that are fantastic photographers that you could rent out your skills to some of these builders in order to help them, get success. Because I feel like
Yeah, I completely agree. There's so many good builds out there that don't have great picks, and I've even offered that. So if anyone is interested, it's just the logistics of sending a kit. Like, I'm scared, but I
true.
would I would love to do justice to some of these kits I see that don't have good shots.
And it's not even like even if you were as a judge, even if you didn't want to discriminate based on photography, sometimes you can't help it because
Yeah,
how are you
can't
supposed
tell.
to how are you
Yeah,
supposed to capture those details? How are you supposed to observe it in a way that really replicates that in-person experience? And so that's where I think the value of having these small local build competitions
yeah,
is can't be measured. So it was fun. I can't wait to do it again, and,
yeah.
of course, I'm gonna invite you guys along for the ride. I will have a full video on, like, the build and props and gimmicks of the Bawu that, drops later. But, let's see, what else? Oh, so we also had our first episode of the Free Speech Geek podcast
Oh,
here
that's
on
right.
Monday.
Yeah,
So if you guys are I mean, you all know Kyle, over at Free Speech Geek, Simply New Type. We are starting a new sort of, almost general
yeah,
pop culture podcast because
right.
it's not focused entirely on Gundam or, on
Even video
Gunpla.
games. Yeah, it's like
So
anything that we're interested in that, we would talk about as friends anyway. Yeah, we're gonna all 3 doing it live every Monday. We did
yeah.
our first one, yeah, this past Monday, and it was really fun, so,
Yeah, so
yeah.
go check that out, guys, if you haven't already. But without much further ado, I think we can get into today's topic in chief, which it's might be a little controversial. We'll see where we go with it. But
Yeah.
it came to me in a dream. No, it came to me because over the weekend, I noticed that there were a lot of the old Uncle Ted, Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski memes going around, and Industrial Revolution and its consequences, yada yada yada, right? And, it got me thinking about, you know, a lot of people kind of have this weird idolization of Kaczynski, and, having watched Wendigoon's video, which was a fantastic breakdown, I can't help but think, that he was not necessarily an ideological person that was trying to carry that out in a terroristic fashion. I think that he was a terroristic person that used an ideology to rationalize his behavior. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what we talk about with Kyle, honestly, is how people are emotional creatures. We make decisions based on our gut, and then we use our brain afterwards to rationalize those decisions.
Oh, yeah.
So, it got me thinking about that old phrase, the method or, what was it?
The
The
message
medium is the message.
the me okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So, you've heard that phrase before, right?
From you.
Oh, there we go. So, it's one of those things that, and I wrote about this back in college, oh my gosh, like, what, 15 years ago? I wrote about this when it comes to, like, margin notes and Oscar Wilde and how, like, the way that you communicate your message is actually the message, and the medium, that's what it really comes down to, is the way that you're
Right.
trying to communicate your message is actually part of your message. And so when you look at somebody who commits terroristic actions as a result of a manifesto that they're writing, the way that I interpret that is that, like, the actions that you're taking, the means are your message. It's like you wanted to commit the terroristic actions, not share the ideology. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I agree, and that's a very interesting thing to think about. So, like, and not to get too topical, but
Yeah.
there was a recent assassination attempt, and that individual didn't have anything in their background to even say that this was something that they would have done. There was no manifesto, there was no social media. And so
Yeah.
that's an interesting angle. And I want to talk about that a little more later when we get into Char Aznable.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up because that brings up an interesting segue. And we've talked about Char Aznable and the sort of heel turn of Char's counterattack before. And I have to say, I've come around on this idea because you and I used to, or well, maybe you still believe this. I'll ask you your opinion here in just a
Okay.
second. Because I know that I used to think that, like, man, the heel turn from Zeta to Char's counterattack, what a 180, like, it's total whiplash. But, going through Zeta and rewatching it and really digesting each of these individual scenes, you start to realize that Char Aznable never really changed, and maybe he was aspiring to something different, but I think that Char Aznable was still the same malicious, manipulative bastard that he was in 1979 in
Mm.
0079 as he is in 0087, and the facade of Quattro Bagina in Zeta was actually him, pretending. And there's little glimpses of that, like, for instance, when he's talking to Commodore Blex, and Blex is saying, "Oh, do you want Camille to join the AUG because you think he's a new type?" And Shar says, it's this very cryptic line. He's like, if that's what you want to believe, then sure. Like, basically, the gist of it is like, yeah, that's what I believe if
Like, oh
that's what
yeah,
you
good
believe.
idea for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, wait a second, what kind of a response is that? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so when you see something like in Char's counterattack, where his objective is to, evolve all of humanity into new types, and he's got this ideal for everyone to abandon Earth and move into space, and we all, share in the cosmic wisdom that is Lala Soon's vision of new types. I'm like, okay, well, how does dropping an asteroid onto Earth solve that? And I start thinking to myself, wait, maybe the means are the message, and maybe he just wanted to drop an asteroid onto Earth. And there, there's obviously like the suicide by Amuro, suicide by cop type
Yeah.
analysis of his behavior, but I think that he just wanted to hurt as many people as he possibly could. And the ideological component of it was the excuse, the rationalization of his behavior. But I want before we get into like that, I do want to hear like, so where do you stand on Shar?
No, this is very good because it's actually made me think about things a little differently. You bringing this up because my stance was, watching Char's counterattack. I think it's just okay. I'm glad it's short. It's a fun watch, but I didn't believe Char after watching Zeta. You know,
Mm,
and it was mainly because, like, in Zeta, that was a very complex character, but once we got to Char's counterattack, maybe he's still complex, but within the time frame we didn't get a complex character written necessarily because it was more of, "Okay, Amuro, I need to battle you to the death. Look what you did to Lalasuna, and I'm gonna show the world or Earthsphere who I am." But it's like it was distilled into that.
yeah.
So, actually, let me not go further so you can. So my original take was I didn't believe Char and Char's counterattack. There was something missing, but let's move on.
No, I think that you're right. And part of it, it could just be the length of the film. It doesn't give you a lot of room to really expand upon his character.
Right.
And we're talking about like seeing him after a gap of time where we didn't get to see what had happened between, we're talking about, what is it, a 6 year difference, 87 to 93.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, well, I guess technically seven if you count the zero, but
Hey, if it has to do with numbers, oh, count the 0 like Terrence Howard's, no, I'm joking. That was I was
that's
just
exactly.
I don't know.
There's another amateur scientist, but, yeah, I think that and we were talking about this just before, is that, as we go through Char's story in the animation at least, going from 79 to Zeta to Char's counterattack, isn't it interesting how visually we see him peeling back layers of the mask? So, like, in the first in the series, he's got the helmet, he's got the mask on, everyone thinks that he's got a scarred up face and stuff like that. And then in Zeta, he's constantly got the sunglasses. So we get a little bit more peeking through, but then by the time we hit Char's counterattack, there's no more facade, there's no more mask, there's no more pretending to be something that he's not. And
Almost like
even
he's been radicalized in accepting that he's been radicalized.
yeah, and I think that especially after the speech in Dakar in Zeta, I think that that was a big turning point for him because he realized that the means of just speaking were never going to accomplish what he wanted.
Mhm.
And maybe and so, there's 2 ways of looking at that, right? So, like, you can look at it charitably and believe him at face value, where it's like, he truly believed that there was a peaceful way to evolve humanity into new types. Like, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna send politicians into space, and I'm gonna give this speech at Dakar, and I'm going to tell everyone who I am so that they listen to me." It's like, no, because I think even in the speech at Dakar, he's like, "I'm Quattro Bagina of the Ayug, but I've gone by another name, Char Aznable, but I have another name that is also" like,
Yeah.
he's like, "Okay, I get it. Like, not only are you a Xeon, but you're also Ayug, but you're also a Xeon
He's
Tycoon's
coping.
son."
He's using identity to kinda cope through the
Yeah.
ages. Yeah.
And, I think that the reason that that felt uncomfortable for him and the reason that he, like, hates being a politician is because that's not who he is, those aren't the methods that he wants to use. He wants to use violence. And so, like I said, the charitable reading is that after Dakar, he arrived at the conclusion that, man, there really is no peaceful way to evolve humanity into new types. I need to force it. And Amuro kind of gives him the benefit of the doubt in Char's counterattack when they're going back and forth about ideology. And Amuro's saying, well, intellectuals get impatient with humanity, and that's why they become recluses and become antisocial. And I think that Amuro's missing the point. I think that the not charitable reading of Dakar is that the reason it didn't work for Char is because that's not what he wanted to do in the first place. He wanted to he wanted to just basically blow up that like if he had had a bomb with him, he would have blown up that room full of politicians in Dakar.
Yeah. And so if we go back to, yeah, 0079 and even before that, the general idea is an injustice happened to him as a child. He wants to get back at that, and that is him moving up in the ranks of Xeon to then take out the zombie family.
Yeah.
And it's almost like by the end, it's like, okay, he fulfilled that, you know, but there it could be that still inkling of a personal attack about his father's ideology, not necessarily that it was his. But so then what happens? Why does he join the AUG? And it's like, well, the Federation is still the Federation to him. And then there are Xeon remnants, but he's taken out his family, or not his family. He's taken out the family, the zombie family that is kind of, you know, doing all this. So for him, it's interesting because if you think about it, then at Zeta during that timeline, what is Quattro really trying to achieve? It's more like he got stuck in his nature, in his ways. It's a little bit of that identity of, yeah, I'm from space. Space people should, in Earth should all be working together. And but what's interesting about that is during Zeta, Haman is like, "Hey, you got to join us. You got to join us. We need." So it's like, okay, then who at Neo Zeon is pulling the strings? And
Yeah.
I'm asking for real, like, who was in charge of the Xeon proper after 0079 and before he reclaimed, I guess, by Char's counterattack? And there's a
Yeah.
reason I'm asking this.
Well, I guess there was a power vacuum, right? Because you had Haman trying to use Maneva to take
Right.
control. Then you also had Glemmy who had a claim to
Right.
Xeon Regency. But
And then
I mean, do you have a
yeah.
more
So then by the time we get to Char's counterattack, Anaheim Electronics is helping with various mobile suits they're both using. So it kind of goes back to where, and it could be that Char recognizes this. Like
yeah,
there is, whether there's Federation and Xeon, it's almost like modern politics. It's really the same thing after the zombie family dies. It's really just those corporations that have the money to produce the weapons, and you can even see this in Unicorn. They're just trying to steer conflict so they can take advantage of it. So Char, by the time Quattro becomes Char in Char's counterattack, he's caught up in a system that he knows is really overtaken by the corporate war building machine or whatever you would call that. Because
Yeah,
at that point, he doesn't care. He doesn't have to hide from anybody. But that's why he's doing things in the way he is, because he knows at the end of the day in the background, it's not that the Federation is really trying to have peace.
right.
Whoever is control of Xeon, it's probably the Federation through corporations. There's no one there. So, and here's the other way to bring it around. So if indeed there was a legitimate like ruling leader of power for Xeon after 0079, that person would probably be leveraging Quattro in a different way than Haman was trying to just, hey, join us. Like that wasn't what Char was wanting or needing. But if there was someone smart enough that was maybe at odds with the Federation's corporate sort of style takeover, with Anaheim Electronics kind of leading the way, it's almost like um today how sometimes like politicians are bought. That
Yeah, oh,
sort
yeah.
of idea. And like you brought up the Dakar scene, Amro's idea or Amro Shar's identity is never politician. It's
Oh, no.
always, and so by the time you get to Shar's counterattack, he's the type of person you can't buy. He is leading just a group because they actually don't have a leader. And Anaheim Electronics is like, well, yeah, you're going to help us continue some more. So, we'll help design the new
Yeah, game
Gundam.
on.
And yeah. And so,
And
and
what's
so,
funny is I think that you're onto something here
okay.
with this military industrial complex approach, because I think that not only do we have something in contemporary the contemporary world where that exists,
Yeah.
but also, even extending into Unicorn, there's still that power vacuum in Xeon. And
Yep.
there's a reason that the sleeves broke away from Xeon, like the Xeon Republic, is because they identified, and I think someone in chat even mentioned Full Frontal, is
Yeah.
that like Full Frontal identified that Maneva was just like basically a vassal of the Federation. There's no Xeon Republic as long as the Federation exists.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I think is very interesting, and that's kind of how, and I could be incorrect on this, but that's kind of how I view like even our world today, like you were talking about, where it's almost like if we look at like the U.S.'s actions overall, they're involved in so many different countries, they're involved in the weapons we see other countries using. It's like, okay, so this is just that same old trope, but I feel like I don't know if it was intended in the writing of the original Gundam, like the original Tomino, or it's almost like a matter of fact, that's just how it is. So this is how everyone's reacting. We don't need to like hit you over the head with it.
That's a very interesting idea that you bring up, because and shout out, thank you for the sub, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Because and we see this with Tomino kind of retconning his own thinking on his writing from, 45 years ago, where he will say that, like, oh, well, yeah, of course I was thinking about Israel Palestine when I wrote this. And it's like, were you, or were you just writing about human nature? And I think that that goes back to what we were saying, like, where, you know, we are going to write what we know, we're going to write our experiences, we're going to do what humans do. And it just so happens that because human nature is the way it is, and we repeat these cycles of, oppression and tyranny and war, that we can draw these conclusions in hindsight and again sort of rationalize the writing that happened back then. So
Yep.
isn't it interesting how a war story like Gundam from 1979, Tomino's inspiration probably was not Israel Palestine at the time. It was probably, a collection of other things. But now here we are 40 years later, and you can say, oh, well, that's kind of similar to the way that like Russia has encroached on Ukraine. It's kind of similar to this relationship between Israel Palestine. And it's like, well, of course you can say that stuff because human nature is cyclical and we're all doing the same.
Yeah, in cyclical in many ways, not only from maybe what the people in charge or in power are trying to do, um, but also people's reaction to things.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people's reaction to things are, if you don't really know what's bad about it, you might just then come up with some surface level, "Oh, I don't like it because of this," or "I don't like it because of that." And but at the same time, that human nature element. So sure, maybe Tomino didn't mean that, but it is the human reaction where then there's that parallel
Yes.
across generations.
Exactly. And I mean, it's why things like, the hero's journey myth exist, is because we tell the same stories over and over. We just change we change the avatar, we change the main character of what that story is. But I do want to go back to something that you were talking about earlier in this sense of like identity, where, I wanted to ask you, where do you see Char's motives in taking on the Quattro Bagina identity? Because when you look at it, was there a reason that he would be afraid that Ayug would persecute him for being Shar Aznable or Casval Daikun? You know, why not simply go by Edward Moss or Casval Daikun with the Ayug?
That's a good question. I wonder if part of it is him not really knowing who he really is after that point, because he spent his whole life with what happened to him, his father and mother, him and his sister. And then it's like he finally got this moment to right that personal wrong that he wanted to, and is just take out the zombie family, and he did it. And now there's still that underlying, again, it's like his dad's ideology that maybe he picked up on, but maybe by the time Zeta comes around, he doesn't really know who he is. Especially after meeting someone like Amuro, it's like he really admired Amuro.
Yeah.
And it's almost like he's like, "Man," and maybe Char himself, when he took on Char Aznable, he's like, "Yeah, I'm a badass. This is me." And then maybe after taking out the zombie family, which was the personal thing, but he couldn't really face up against Amuro, that might have been another layer to him. So then, yeah, by the time we get to Zeta, he's like, "Okay, I'm taking on this new identity to try to figure out what I'm trying to do." Because even by the end of Zeta, it's like he didn't even know what to do. It's like everyone's telling him all these things he is and what he should be doing, and he's just like, "I don't
Yeah.
know," you know?
Because he's not naturally a leader. And I think that it's interesting. So a couple weeks ago, we had Howling at the Earth. Wayne Snow
Oh,
joined
yeah.
us, and the track that really got me into his music was a song called Avalanche. And what's interesting is, we had the conversation with him, and that song is about, you know, the cycles of abuse, and like how we kind of pass our traumas onto our children, and then their children are, we all kind of inherit the traumas that are inflicted on our parents. And what's interesting is that got me thinking about Shar Aznable, especially when you said, like, maybe he's trying to find this new identity. Maybe he was trying to break the cycle of trauma that was passed down to him from his father. That, who knows, like, obviously there's no story prior to Zeon Daikun and like the
Yeah.
assassination attempt, but was there a trauma that was associated with that led Zeon Daikun to develop his ideology and to speak out on these things? And yeah, it makes me wonder if there was not necessarily a conscious effort, maybe it was like a subconscious effort to kind of break out of that cycle of abuse and um I guess
Well,
war.
also maybe because of and I know this happened out of universe, but in Zeta, it kind of by then, I mean, he doesn't have a relationship with his sister, you know, much
Right.
anymore. So was that maybe a conscious effort on his part to separate himself? Or
Right.
was
To
that more
distance
her
himself.
just wanting to stay away from him? But still, that's another variable that can be included. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that you don't see with other prominent Char clones. Like, for instance, the relationship between Miliardo and Relina in Gundam Wing. Like, they are constantly trying to come back together and
Mm,
revive the Sank Kingdom. But like, that's completely the opposite of Sayla and Char, who are
yeah.
just pushing each other away. At
Yeah.
least in the origin, they kind of have like a little bit more of a reconciliation, but not anything substantial.
Yeah, but you just brought up Wing, and it's interesting how every
And
once
you're
in a
like,
while.
"Man, cyclical trauma, now I'm being
No,
trauma."
no, that's funny, but it's almost like I miss I actually miss how schlocky and fun it was just to turn on an episode of Wing when I watched it for the first time, just
That's
seeing the
right.
beginning, getting into it, it's like, "Okay, we're gonna see some bananas stuff going on," so
I'm going to convert you into a wing fan.
it Yeah, anyway, that's not this. That could be another episode.
Yeah, actually, and you know what? On that subject of wing is, I think that a lot of the Gundam protagonists have this same method is the message, or medium is the message,
Yeah,
means of the message, whatever, however you want to phrase it.
yeah.
Trace Kushranada is another example of someone that it's like you don't necessarily disagree with where he's coming from. And he has like this whole thing where it's like, oh, well, 9,816 of my soldiers have died today. Lady Un, give me a list of their names so that I can memorize them. And, like the ideology behind Trays is actually very cool. Well, not cool, but
Right. Yeah,
you
it's
think
very
about
intriguing for that
yeah.
type of character. Yeah.
But then, when you look at the means of like, okay, so what was the Trays faction exactly trying to accomplish? Well, to create more war, to kill more
Yeah,
people,
so it's like, then is that really smart
Y
and cool of you? No. Yeah,
yeah,
that is I mean, that's what's interesting because it kinda goes back to what you're bringing up at the beginning where it's like, is I mean, is violence of any kind justified? And I don't know if that is necessarily answered, but I'll give you, I'll throw out something here. I
okay,
was There was something I was doing recently. It was a conversation with a bunch of people, and someone brought up that still today we don't know if dropping the atom bomb was a good or bad idea. But my
mhm,
first thought was it was a bad idea.
yeah,
In fact, Japan was ready to surrender, and the people wanting to launch the bomb said specifically, "We're going to do this anyway, just to show our power." So then it makes me think, okay, then yeah, the bomb wasn't justified at all. And I think a lot of times when violence is used to send a message, even if it seems like it's for peace, it goes back to what I was saying about who's really in power. You
mm,
know what I mean? So, like a colony being dropped on Earth, that was allowed to happen because of who is in power. It's those little things like that, like the Titans were fine with, use it. And so I feel like Char was never really the one in power, but he could be. And I think someone brought it up in chat. He didn't really want the responsibility, but it's almost like he had to. But then he just
yeah,
falls into that trap that the people with real power have, and is to use violence.
and you know what? I think he even says something to that effect in Char's counterattack when he's like, "It's my duty to enforce discipline, Amuro."
Oh, yeah, yeah. So,
Which
and what could that be?
right, like, what do you mean it's your duty? Like, who
Yeah,
who has that responsibility, And so I think, yeah, you're definitely onto something there, and again, I think that there's always going to be rationalization of what we deem necessary, right? And I think that was the dropping of the atom bomb revenge for Pearl Harbor? Maybe. Maybe that's what it really was just bloodlust, but then we have, we revise, we have this mental revisionism where it's like, "Oh, wait, we had to do it, otherwise they weren't going to surrender," and who knows whether that's the case or not, because honestly, no one can be sure. Like, it goes back to the kind of the conversation we were having with Kyle on Monday, where it's like you were talking about archaeology being not necessarily a scientific field
right.
because you can't recreate those experiments. Everything is just based on the evidence that we have available to us, and that evidence may change over time. So, well, let me rephrase that. Evidence doesn't change, but new evidence can resurface.
Right, and then people will take things as fact even though how do you know that is fact? And it's kinda like,
Exactly.
what's different with today in social media is if there is some sort of worldwide or some sort of national event that's maybe related to violence or a big deal, there's so many more data points people can look at and then be like, "Okay, this probably didn't happen like this, or this was probably staged." But until someone can say, "Yes, it was," we just have to go on conspiracy, the whole time, which yeah, that's probably what's going on throughout all of Gundam. Again, it's the people in power, that are kind of pulling these strings.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? This actually gives me an opportunity to draw a comparison, not only between Char and Teddy K, but also between Char and one of my favorite characters from another franchise, which would be Big Boss from the
Okay.
Metal Gear Solid franchise, or Metal
Is
Gear franchise.
Big Boss the mom or the kid? Because I don't know.
So, the boss is the mom.
Okay, there we go.
Big Boss is or well, I guess mom in quotes. Big Boss is the character that, you play as in Metal Gear Solid 3 and, Peace Walker.
Ah, okay.
And so he is actually the villain in the first 2 Metal Gear games.
So that is your favorite character?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Now,
Okay.
I think the reason and I think that, this is one of the reasons I'm always trying to get you to play Metal Gear Solid
Yeah.
5.
Yeah,
But,
I know. Wait, would you say though that I should just play 5 and not worry about the others right now?
no, I mean, I would say play through them for sure. I mean, everyone loves Metal Gear Solid 3. I think it's fantastic, so
Yeah, maybe I should do Twin Snakes.
yeah. Twin
Yeah.
Snakes, I think, is an easier it's a much more enjoyable version of the first game because
And
you
then if
have
I
a lot of
become an obsessed fan, then I go back and then we'll
yeah,
play
there
that
you
again.
go. But so the thing about Big Boss is obviously he starts off as a, CIA agent, during the 1960s, and he's, this rookie agent that is going on these, Russian expeditions and, doing the right thing, right? And it's not until his idol, the boss, is killed that he gets into this ideological conflict with the state, the deep state.
Oh,
But,
okay. There we go.
he creates this ideology of like, well, I think that I want to create a utopia for soldiers like me that don't have a country to fight for, that we don't believe in national pride or anything like that. We are just and in Metal Gear Solid Walker, they call it Militaire Sans Frontiers, which is like soldiers without borders, which is kind of a
Hmm.
weird play on like Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah, that is.
um, but I and I'm getting around to my point here
Yeah, yeah.
is I think that that is what Char is. Char is a soldier and a warrior that he doesn't align with any necessary like, he doesn't not align with a Xeon nationality. He doesn't align with a Federation nationality.
He
He
can't
is
be
a
bought.
right. So he exists simply to carry out war. And so when the opportunity arises for him to serve one side or the other, he's always going to have an ideological rationality for why it's important for him
Mhm.
to serve that side. But it really doesn't, that's not why he's doing it. He's doing it because that's what he exists to do. Like I
Yeah,
said, the medium is the message.
it's the
He,
human nature we were talking about where you sometimes don't realize what conflict you're dealing with, so sometimes it comes out in the form of violence
yeah.
or whatever, yeah.
So, I and that ends up being like one of the major plot threads. And like you said, throughout like Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, you have these like elusive groups, the Patriots, the Lale Lule Lo, that they're the ones secretly in control of the governments and controlling world politics. And Big Boss is constantly trying to remove himself from that and like shut all that down. And so I think that to your point, if the Federation bureaucracy in Gundam exists as this kind of amorphous entity that is in control of all these sort of chess pieces. And it's like, we don't necessarily care who Xeon's being ruled by
Yeah,
because we control them anyway. They are just a proxy for us to project hate onto as the Federation so that we can continue to, drive profits, get our revenue, make more weapons, destroy more remnants. It's this like cycle of, the snake that bites its own tail.
right.
Um,
And I would love to see that. I would love to see Shar, as he has taken his position, leader of Neo Zeon, then uncover the shit that's really happening behind the scenes, so we see him have this disdain and for Xeon.
But I don't think he ever uncovered it. I
Yeah,
think that he still thought that he was fighting against the Federation even when he was in service of the Federation.
yeah,
And I think that that's probably the biggest tragedy of Char is that, like, he was always still just the cog in the machine,
yeah. And
but
didn't really get it. He was almost there. And I
yeah,
think it's just because at the end of the day, again, it's not the ideology necessarily that it was this personal issue he had since a kid with his father, just in terms of what happened to his dad. And
yeah,
it's interesting that you brought up, could he have been abusive or something? There was one thing I found interesting was once you watch the origin, which is canon with every animation, all the
exactly.
uh, you see um his dad, Zeon
Uh,
Doom Daikun, yeah, act very, like, aggressive when at one point where he was, like, angry and mad. It's like, okay, where does that aggression come from? Has displayed
Exactly.
that any other time, so that's made me think maybe Char or Casval had experienced that.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine somebody that has such fervent political opinions that is gonna go out and, give these
Change the
rallies and
world, yeah,
speeches, that they would somehow also be a caring and doting parent that would never raise their voice to their child.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think that there's probably some meat on that bone.
It's interesting, like, are there any stories where you see maybe even it might not be a villain, but whatever, a character go through an arc where they eventually deal with maybe trauma from before that then changes them and we kind of see that. I mean, I'm sure that seems very broad and I'm sure that's happened, but I'm trying to think if there's anything like that just comes up about that's like, oh, because I think Star Wars and Luke seemed to grow up with a good life. It's just on a farm, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's like he didn't have any of that. We didn't see any big character arcs with him. With Anakin, all the stuff was happening to him just as his his whole life. It was more of just the people around him, weren't the best around him. So
Yeah, I would be interested to see, like, a really strong example of that. There's definitely some, I would say, like, rug pull moments, and the first one that pops into my head, I don't know why this is, but, from the first Blade movie, where, Blade has this idealized version of his mother throughout that film.
oh
But then there's that
yeah.
rug pull moment at the end where it's like, no, she
She was
turned
alive the whole
herself into a
time.
vampire.
And
She's been living
yeah.
without you and never like, that's one of those things where
Wow, that's a
we
good one.
yeah, I think that there are some times in fiction where you have this idealized version of your parent figure, and then it's not until later that you can kind of unpack, like, wait a second, maybe they weren't perfect.
Yeah, it's almost like that meeting where they say don't meet your heroes because Blade never got to know his mom. He just knows what happened.
Exactly.
And then it's like your whole life thinking, "Oh, what kind of person could she have been?" And then you meet them. It would be like if you went to go meet a famous actor. Luckily, all the actors I've met have been really nice. So don't have an example, but let's say you go meet an actor you love so much, and then they're just like a dick to you, and you're like, "Oh my god," you
Yeah.
know, like
Don't date Amuro, no.
yeah. But
No,
no,
that's
that is
a terrible joke. I
no,
apologize for that one.
no, but really good point because Blade is top 3 all-time favorite movies for me, and
Oh, it's so
I never really hung on that point and really digested it, and there is a lot going on there in that scene, but it's so quick.
yeah, yeah,
Especially it's at the end near the climax where you're trying to save the girl anyway or try to stop the blood thing from happening, so then that happens.
right.
Yeah. The
Yeah, there's that movie is fantastic. It's still my favorite, like, Marvel superhero movie, hands
yeah.
down. Like, they perfected it. They didn't need to do all of the, Avengers stuff.
Yeah.
But, I do wanna go back to, what you were saying about, like, Char getting so close to uncovering the conspiracy of the Federation, because I think that we do get that satisfaction through Full Frontal. I
Yeah.
think that because Full Frontal does not have the same trauma, whether it's, parental,
Mm.
whether it's the fact that he lost his father, whatever happened to Shar that made him the kind of broken man that he was, Full Frontal doesn't have that. And so isn't it interesting that Full Frontal, his method is not to drop colonies, is not to drop asteroids. His method is this economic ecosphere where we're going to, rob the Federation of their
Yeah.
economic strength, right?
Right. To make it to where people outside Earth can sustain themselves. They don't need Earth for that, which we see play out in G Savior. I always want to bring that up. That there's a link to G Savior. And so that's interesting. Then I wonder if do you think Full Frontal was designed for that?
I wonder, like, I don't know the, exact details about, like, Full Frontal's cloning process. I do know that,
They
like,
don't have a lot. It's
yeah,
actually really up in the air, which is kind of cool if you think about it. But it
which,
does
I mean,
bring
well, no, okay, I will
oh,
never mind.
I know Unicorn, like how
Well
I am with Char's
well, n
counterattack.
I was actually going to, bring up again Metal Gear, and I was like, "Oh, man, you know what? Full Frontal just reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 5." And then I was like, "No, I can't talk about this because it's a spoiler for Adam." So
Hey, well, if it's good content
for those of you, let me entertain this. For those of you who have played through Metal Gear Solid 5 and also watched Gundam Unicorn, I think that you probably see where I'm going with this. I think that there is a relationship there between Char, Full Frontal, and Big Boss, and I'll just leave it at that.
Cool. Yeah, I'm intrigued, and I think this is neat because we're talking about these shows and interpreting them ourselves, which
Yeah.
could be actually incorrect. But
Yeah, and that's where it's like, I've come around on some of these things, and so
yeah.
I'm really just kind of thinking about these things out loud.
But as you brought up though, I think though where the justification is a lot of this is ruined is rooted in the natural human way we are. And sometimes we can't explain it. So,
Yeah,
but I think if the kind of ideas that we're extrapolating from what we're seeing is kind of rooted in who we are as humans with emotions. So I think it comes from the same place in the end. Because sometimes I think people will interpret something a certain way. I'm like, well, why would you even think that? How would you even know? But I think just like with canon, there's some things that you can accept and it's like it works and it doesn't ruin anything else, but it makes this
yeah.
stronger. It makes it where when I want to explain ideas to other people, there's more of a basis around it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that, yeah, and, there's always context for everything. A lot of people, when it comes to, like, the canon discussion, we tend to accept things at face value, and one of my favorite sort of tropes in fiction is the unreliable narrator.
Oh,
A lot of people assume like, "Oh, well, they said that they dismantled the Unicorn Gundam," and it's like, "Well, they said that,
yeah. I love
that
that.
doesn't mean that they did it." And,
Yeah.
like, just because Shar says that his motivation is something, doesn't mean that that's what it is, and that we go back and forth about Tomino and the way that he writes humanity the way that they are, not the way that we wish them to be, and so I think when you watch a lot of, like, rom-coms and you watch a lot of TV that's, like, I don't wanna say lowbrow, but, like, junk TV, stuff like if you were to look at, like, the writing in The Acolyte, and you were to
Mm.
compare that to something like a Gundam series, you can tell that the way The Acolyte is written, that you don't have people lying because they assume that the people watching the show are too stupid to realize that a character might be lying. You
Yeah,
know,
that
they
is a very interesting part of the writing. You know what? Even to make a better comparison, the writing of the Acolyte versus the writing of Andor.
there you go.
Because they're the same production company, but like Andor writing and Andor doesn't have as much action and lightsaber stuff as Acolyte, but the writing in Andor is like so compelling. And then Acolyte, and that could be another podcast. Probably don't have time for that today, but like, finished it and it again, it just suffers from illogical dot connecting.
Yeah, and I think there's when it comes to that type of stuff and, like you said, we can definitely go into that. Actually, let's plan on doing that next week. We'll do a
Yeah.
deep dive story analysis of like, Acolyte versus some Gundam series and see if there's any
Yeah,
meat
something
there
else we can pull from there. Yeah.
to talk about. But yeah, I think that without some kind of obvious context clue that a character is not being forthright, audiences will tend to accept what they say. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity to look into, like, you know, do you necessarily mean everything you say? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and not even in a, like, malicious, like, "I'm gonna lie" way, but, like, sometimes we're dishonest even with ourselves, and we say, you know, like, shoot, even this morning, I'm like, "I don't wanna go to work today." But if I didn't wanna go to work today, then I wouldn't work, Like,
Yeah, exactly. That's good point. Good point. It
you
creates
know,
like a
we
mindset sometimes. Yeah.
exactly. And so when you look at some of these lines and maybe we need to do a deep dive on, like, looking at every single line that we think people are being dishonest about, because I think that there are tons of examples throughout all of Gundam, particularly in 79 Zeta and Char's Counterattack, where you get people saying things that maybe they don't believe or maybe they only partially believe, especially when you have conversations like the one between Hathaway and
And
Quest. Oh,
I
go
was
ahead.
about to say Hathaway and Andalusia in Hathaway. Like
Perfect
those are both.
example.
Yeah, it's like they're not saying what they should be saying, but because in that situation they're in, they're just having to say what they can to get through that moment. And you're like, Hathaway, just say but there's a lot going on in his mind. And it's not like he's gonna
Exactly.
sit here and do exposition for everybody.
And, like, do you ever find yourself sitting watching a movie and you're like, "Oh my god, they would just solve everything if that person would just tell the truth about this thing to that person." It's like,
Yeah.
that imagine that, but then on an even more infinitely complex scale when it comes to Gundam, particularly with a character like Char, who has been through so many, we call them character building moments in Gundam, right?
Right, but
Like
not only
Ghoul had a lot of character building going on in, Witch from Mercury, right?
oh, yeah, and they don't necessarily even know what's really the truth if they were to just say what they mean to say.
Yeah,
Sometimes the characters themselves don't know, like, Hathaway and Lucia, Gigi.
Gigi?
Yeah,
Yeah,
how it's like, of course he wanted to be with her. At first, he's just saying, "Cute girl, we're talking, this is great." In any normal situation, that would be great. But there's all that baggage of the new type stuff, what he went through before, what he's actually
yeah,
doing right now, which is actually he has no time for dating someone. So yeah, that's a very interesting dynamic that that's what I think that movie's great. The fact that Gundam started in 79 and then in 2019 or 20 we get something with that degree of writing. It's like
yeah.
have them write Star Wars.
Right, there you go, exactly. It's so simple.
It's so simple.
The oh, man, they almost achieved greatness. They were this close. But yeah, and it's very interesting because to me, I think that Hathaway, especially in the film, is very much like a rudderless version of Camille. Because Camille is a new type that had the benefit of having, Char and Amuro both trying to coach him through his feelings and these
Yeah.
conflicts that he was having. Um, Hathaway doesn't have that.
Good point, because not only was it Sharon Amaro or Quattro Amaro, but also the other crew of the Argama.
Yeah,
They would speak there was a lot of scenes about Camille's emotions, which was great. And if you think about it, Hathaway, and this is kind of another layer about kids in the Gundam universe, is Hathaway was younger at that time, and no one really, cared about him or what he was doing. Oh, it's just Son of Bright.
yeah.
He's doing whatever, and no one really cared to mentor him like Camille. Camille had no one, but people were stepping up. So, see how people can get lost just because of the perception that they have structure? You know?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and, to your point, just because someone seems like they are, a good and honorable person, we look at someone like Bright, and it's like, "Okay, yeah, Bright is a great guy," he nurtured Amuro into being the Gundam pilot that he was, oftentimes accepting the role of being the villain aboard the ship. He did that in a cynical way in order to draw the best out of Amuro. He took
Yep.
Banagher under his wing, but
Yep.
then it's like, where were you when your own son was being
I
raised?
know, that is so interesting. That is a very interesting dynamic.
So, yeah, I mean, like you said, don't meet your heroes because you will be
Yeah.
thoroughly disappointed. But, this has been great, like, I love these
Yeah.
types of discussions, and again, none of this is anything, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? None of it's
Controversial.
concrete or set in stone,
Oh, I see what you're saying. We're kind of interpreting things and
yeah,
having a discussion
using
about it.
this opportunity to make inferences about a character that I think is often maligned, misunderstood. Um, there's always that meme that's like, "Oh, if you worship them, then you miss the point," or kind of thing, and it's like always Char.
Yep.
So I think that having these conversations is good, not only to better understand the franchise that we love so well, but also to better understand human nature, which clearly Tomino is a student of human nature when he's writing characters like this
Yeah,
that behave in these types of manners.
I think so.
Sweet.
Yep,
Well, yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for today's show. We've got the Gundam Explained show tomorrow at 5
that's right.
Eastern, 4 Central. If you haven't checked it out, go watch Adam's video from today about some Amazon Prime deals. There should be still they should still be good, right? It's
Yeah,
not
I think
one day.
I think they're up for a couple days, but also in there
Yeah.
I talk about the cheap, model kit supplies you can get, which are handy, to
Yeah,
stock up on every once in a while. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, like I have like my nice God hand nippers, but I don't ever cut the pieces off of the runner with the God
exactly.
hands.
You
It's like
always
I'll
get the
use my
cheap stuff.
junk.
Yeah, that's exactly
So
it,
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, with those sanding sticks that you brought up, um,
Yeah,
uh,
and the other big thing about that too is we always talk about the little things you can do if you think it's too hard. There's so many little cheap things you can get off Amazon just to add some detail and flair to your kits.
like LEDs.
Yeah.
like those LEDs.
Yeah. And metallic markers, those are my favorite.
Oh, yeah, the metallic but those actually I'm a huge fan of, like, using metallic Sharpies, but those ones look so much better because of, like, the paint quality that's in those.
And it looked like it
So
had a Gundam head in the picture, so, you know.
exactly. So, yeah, like I said, guys, we're spoiling the video, but go check it out. Adam's got links for all of that stuff and, links below in the, chat. And again, if you haven't seen the first episode of the Free Speech Geek podcast, I'd say that this is very similar to what we talked about on Monday.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of that, yeah, breaking down things, it's
So
pretty
if you
good.
enjoyed today's conversation, you'll definitely enjoy that one with
Yeah.
Kyle. Until then, you guys have a good rest of your evening. We will catch you later.
Yep. See y'all.
Cheers. Oh, if I can find the end screen.